Good morning, colleagues, students, community actors, and other guests. I first want to thank the Heritage Education Network for an invitation to share some of my thoughts on history and its relevance to Belize's present and future. Today, I want to share my deeply held reflections on an issue that has been in my mind for quite some time. I want to expand the question to also include ideas on how history relates to development. I fundamentally understand development to be multidimensional, encompassing technological advancement, economic and social well-being, and also cultural and human well-being. My understanding balances the instrumental aspects as well as the human, the art, and empathy. I note with some concern the rise in emphasis in STEM, that is, the sciences, technology, engineering, and maths, while the A, which used to be STEAM, the art, are being devalued. I know of some programs closing and other acts to passively continue to devalue it. The growing prioritization of STEM disciplines raises critical questions about the broader ecology of knowledge. In such an environment, what becomes of history, the discipline that shapes our very sense of purpose and belonging? It is within these constructs that I share my thoughts. What is the place of history in our current context? The place in this phrasing relates to what importance does history have in today's world? What role does history play in shaping thought, policy, identity, or development? Where does history stand compared to other disciplines or priorities? How influential is history in public discourse and nation building? Perhaps assessing every aspect may not be possible in this analysis, but certainly it is worth thinking about it. We are in an epoch dominated by rapidly changing technology and global uncertainty. We're in an age of buildings, bridges, and roads. History does not feature in the language of development. We hear the language of progress, innovation, sustainability, digital transformation, yet we rarely hear the word history spoken in those same circles of planning and policy. So again, I ask, what is the place of history? The question is not reduced to the curriculum or institutions. It is about how a nation understands itself, its past, its present, and possibilities of its future. In contributing to answer the question, I gather from Slavoj Zizek that history is not a closed book. Rather, it is an unfinished process filled with traumas and contradictions that continue to shape our realities. For Zizek, history is quote-unquote undead. The past continues to haunt the present because we have not confronted its deepest implications. We may know the facts of enslavement, colonialism, or dispossession, but we often repress what they truly mean for us and for where we are today. Caribbean thinkers such as Hilary Beckles and Assad Schumann have shown how these profound institutions and traumas are institutionalized in economic and cultural structures of today. In Belize, we're in the process of developing a historical consciousness. Like many post-colonial societies, we live with ghosts that we are in the process of understanding. We commemorate emancipation and celebrate independence, but are we questioning the economic, political, and social inequalities? Are we questioning the deep-rooted colonial mentalities and institutions that remain in our governance, education, and culture? To speak of the future of history, therefore, is to acknowledge that the past has not yet passed. We cannot speak of enslavement, the advance and truck system, and the many laws that the colonialists place to suppress, as if they are objects of the past. The ideological and even institutional mechanisms remain in our society today. As Joseph E.O. mentions, the post-colonial society has many gatekeepers that consciously or unconsciously keep the system in place. I therefore agree with Slavoj. We cannot speak of a future without recognizing how we are already repeating the traumas of the past. To seek liberation in this sense is to confront the systems, the silences, and the exclusions. We can no longer acknowledge the existence of injustice, inequality, and power in the past and act as if they do not persist in today's society. I also agree with you. For me, history is not a museum exhibit. We cannot simply learn and move on. The systems that shaped the past are replicated in our societies and kept alive today by gatekeepers. Development without consciousness risks repetition, repeating in new forms the inequalities and silences of the past. We cannot be doomed to think that alternative worlds are not possible. History in its truest form is the art of imagining them. How do we break the cycle? The answer lies in part in how we educate. Here the work of Paulo Freire becomes influential. For Freire, education is never neutral. It is an act of either domestication or liberation. Freire understands education, and by extension history, as both a pedagogical and political act, a process through which people come to read, interpret, question, and act, most importantly, act upon it. If the purpose of history is to liberate, then we must reject the notion that it is a mere collection of facts to be memorized. History is not a menu of events to be passively consumed. It is a living, contested space of meaning. We therefore do not aim to teach an immovable past, but rather to engage students and communities in reading history as a field of power that has shaped and continues to shape our lived realities. To study history critically is to recognize that we are agents. It is important to understand that development cannot be reduced to economic metrics, but must be seen as the expansion of human dignity. In Belize, we're still struggling to realize the full potential of history as a foundation for national consciousness. Our educational frameworks have made progress, but history remains in the margins, included as subfields of many versions of social studies. It is, in many instances, reduced to simplified timelines and patriotic slogans rather than being examined as a dynamic process of struggle and imagination. We must, therefore, reclaim history as an intellectual and civic project. This means enhancing curricula to include deeper conceptual understanding, methodological rigor, and the cultivation of thinkers who move beyond mere surface-level comprehension to become critical, informed, and engaged citizens. Our communities have resisted. Our nationalists have envisioned a fight for independence. They dared to imagine a new Belize, one rooted in self-determination and social justice. But what does that imagination mean for us today, as a nation still grappling with inequality, dependency, and historical amnesia? There is certainly an urgent need to tell our story, to re-examine how our people acted, dreamed, and struggled to imagine freedom. The teaching of Belizean history should not only inform students of what happened, but invite them to interrogate why it happened, whose interests it served, and how it continues to shape our world today. Historical study should be designed as a way of linking the past and the present to envision more equitable futures. Equally, higher education must be empowered to train thinkers, problem solvers, and advocates for transformation. There is a critical need for advanced and specialized training in history to ensure that educators are equipped to teach history as a living process. Accompanying all of this, liberation must also come through research, through a sustained academic effort to question, interpret, and connect Belize's historical experiences to developmental trajectories. For instance, who has meaningfully evaluated the concept of the peaceful constructive revolution and its implications for our political and social evolution? How do we understand that moment today? And what does it reveal about our collective agency and unfinished aspirations? There exists a bridge between the academy, the community, and the nation. A bridge that must be strengthened if history is to serve its emancipatory purpose. History, in seeking liberation, must ultimately serve the people, to humanize development and to nurture a more equitable and conscious Belizean society. Liberation is something that Schumann has worked tirelessly to advance. He has continually warned us that the colonial history of Belize is incomplete and constructed to serve power. When will our academic world be stirred by a new transformative work? When will a new book emerge like Schumann's seminal 13 chapters to reclaim our narratives and once again decentralize the story? This is not only an academic correction, it is a moral and political necessity. To rewrite history from below is to declare that development cannot be built on erasure. Development cannot be built on erasure. When we understand Belize's history as a product of struggle, resistance, and solidarity, development itself takes on a new meaning. It becomes not merely the building of infrastructure, but the building of consciousness, the ability of a people to define their own destiny. The future is also about community. For Filiberto Penados, history is a community of practice for liberation. Development, in this sense, must emerge from people's historical and cultural contexts. He advocates for indigenous perspectives rooted in land, language, and collective memory as ways of understanding progress and well-being. The marginalized stories are not footnotes, but central to our progress. Critiquing the idea of development coming from Western powers, Judith Butler states that different histories and traditions can provide insights into alternative ways of going forward. Both scholars propose that history, its future, must be centered on reclaiming, centering narratives, and promoting social justice. We often speak of development in the language of economics, GDP growth, tourism arrivals, and technological innovation. These are important, but they are not the whole story. History grounds development in identity. It tells us why we develop, for whom, and toward what vision of the good Belizean society. In this way, history becomes development's ethical compass. The task before us is to stop pretending that history is settled and instead to enter into dialogue with its unfinished questions. What does the future of history in Belize look like? It looks like classrooms that teach not only the dates of independence, but the debates and dreams that made it possible. It looks like archives that are not silent vaults, but living spaces where communities can tell their own stories in their own languages. It looks like tourism that is not exploitation, but interpretation, inviting visitors to engage with Belize's living heritage. It looks like development plans that begin with the question, what have we already learned from our people's struggles? What knowledge, what creativity lies in the past that can guide us forward? History and development are two sides of the same human project. As Zizek warns, the greatest illusion is that history is behind us, that we are now more enlightened, more modern, more free. It is within us. It lives within our institutions, in our languages, in the stories we tell, and the silences that we keep. Belizean, Melissa Espat calls for a Belizean bridge to theater and literature. Belizean, Felicita Cantun calls for cultural justice. Belizean, Gwen Nunes Gonzalez calls for respect. Belizean, Silvana Uds calls for inclusion. Belizean, Filiberto Penados calls us to awaken critical consciousness. Belizean, Assad Schumann calls us to reclaim our narrative. Belizean, Yasser Musa calls for the decentralization and liberation of our people. Belizean, Elridge Roy Cayetano calls for linguistic justice. What is your call? We cannot treat the past as a museum, nor development as a technocratic formula. They are in a living dialogue. They are between those who have been and those who dare to become. The future of history lies in the courage to rewrite what could be. In confronting our unfinished past, we discover the true foundation of Belizean development, one built on consciousness, justice, and belonging. Thank you.